The NYU Game Center lecture series. Tonight, we're very excited to have Matt Parker speak. As always, I want to big shout out to our sponsors that help make our event series possible. Arcadium, Avalanche, Take-Two, Fresh Planet, Dots, and Shinra. Thank you very much. So we have a tradition here at the Game Center that when someone joins the full-time faculty, they have the privilege and honor and responsibility of giving a lecture in the lecture series. And we're very excited to have Matt give his lecture tonight, although he joined us as full-time faculty a couple of years ago, so it's been a while. It's hard to schedule these things, and I blame him, but listen, this is not important. Whose fault is it? But actually, even before that, I mean, Matt, our relationship to Matt goes back way back to the very origins of the NYU Game Center. I remember before we existed here in this space, we were over on a floor in Tisch and in the building on 721 Broadway. And before we even were there, we were, it was me and Eric Zimmerman teaching game design at ITP on another floor of that building. Where we taught game design for many years. And then after the Game Center started, I remember thinking about one of the traditions of ITP, which is that on their floor, they have these wonderful interactive pieces that are just up like Wooden Mirror by Danny Rosen, which is this very famous piece of kind of like interactive artwork. And I remember thinking, hey, we should have some of this as part of our identity on the floor. But I really wanted it to not be like ITP. I didn't want it to just be interactive art. I wanted it to be a game. I was like, what would it be like to design something that has that kind of presence, where it's just an interactive thing that's on the wall, but it's not just a mirror, it's not just a toy, it's actually a game. I was like, that's a really interesting design problem. And I remember, so I reached out to Matt Parker because he was very steeped in this culture as an artist and a programmer, coming out of ITP and this tradition of making these kinds of interactive objects. And I said to Matt, could you take something that you know, some of these kinds of things you've been working on and make something that would be a game that would just be a persistent work of art in a public space that's also a game? And that was the origin of Recurse, this wonderful thing that was kind of an extension of this whole tradition of creative computing and programming that comes out of ITP. And Recurse ended up being one of the original works in the very first No Quarter exhibit, and the kind of the origin story of No Quarter as this annual tradition that we have. So so when, you know, fast forward to several years ago when Matt joined the program as here at the Game Center as full-time faculty. I think we had already been someone teaching for us as an adjunct for many years, and at the response kind of Matt's kind of focus is not just thinking about games and their overlap with art and public space, but also especially thinking about the relationship between creativity and engineering, and computation and programming and code and imagination and intuition and expression. And so that is kind of, I think, at the heart of what he does in his work and in his teaching, and it's what we're going to hear about tonight. So please join me in welcoming Matt Parker.
I almost cut Recurse from this talk. I'm super glad that I left it in. How's everybody doing tonight?
Cool. I'm all right.
Yeah, I should open up with that. You guys cool?
Cool.
So thanks, Frank, for that great introduction. There you are. I got a little choked up there. That kind of hit me where I live a little bit. So if I don't have my composure at the beginning, you'll understand why. I have been working with the NYU Game Center for some time, and I'm very proud to be part of the faculty now. This is me, or pre-beard me. And today I'm going to be talking about Weevil games and experiences. And I know what you're probably thinking. What did you just say? Weevil. How many people know the word Weevil? Yeah, because I just came up with it. At least you were. I thought there'd be like a couple of people like, yeah. It'll make more sense in a minute, I promise. But as Frank said, a lot of my interest as a game designer, as an artist, comes from combining digital technology with real physical world experiences. And that's a lot of what this talk is going to be about. And it really connects to my work, not only as an artist, not only as a game designer, but also in what I teach here at the NYU Game Center. And for the record, the mechanical bull, totally Weevil. Maybe that'll hint towards what that word means. Just a quick clarification I want to get out of the gate here. I'm going to be saying digital games a lot instead of video games, or using the word digital, or most people use the word video, simply to sidestep a semantic argument that I really don't want to have about whether or not a game is a video game if it doesn't have a screen or isn't projected or somehow displaying something. So when I say digital, just think thing that is using technology. Cool? Cool. So I've always been interested in this sort of thing. Since I was a kid, my father brought home an Apple III. I've been programming. I started off in Logo. I moved into BASIC. I've probably programmed in about 20 different languages at this point, and I'd say I got really good at a couple and really bad at a lot of them. That being said, one of my primary responsibilities, for those of you who don't know, here at the NYU Game Center, is teaching most of the core programming curriculum. So I'm good at those languages, which is important. But also, for as long as I can remember, I've been really into these sorts of activities. And I really didn't think this one through when I put together the slide. This is really painful right now. It was like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh yeah, no. It's the 2003 National League Championship Series. Mets were one game away from the World Series, and they lost this game in the bottom of the 9th inning. Why would I do that to them? Anyway, despite my recent run of bad luck, I really enjoy sports. And I really enjoy technology. And so I've always, when I started making games, it only made sense to me to try and combine these two things together, to try and make experiences that combine these two things that I love so much. Or, as the programmers might think of it, combine them like this. So for those of you who don't know, which is hopefully a lot of you, this is a bitwise OR. When you use a single pipe like that, when you use two pipes, it means a logical OR. When you use a single pipe, it means a bitwise OR. Don't worry about it. It basically just is a way of combining binary numbers. And so the subheader for this talk, the talk is entitled Beyond the Screen, but the subheader for this talk is Physical Pipe Digital, which means sort of the combination of these two things. And when you actually do the bitwise combination of these two words, you come up with the word Weevil. Wow, groans. Like I'm doing stand-up again, awesome. I was really hoping when I first did this that it would come out to some sort of awesome word that was like super awesome fun game or something like that, but it came out to Weevil, and I saw that as an opportunity. I'm going to take that word, I'm going to make it a word, and I'm going to start using that word, and I'm going to commit to that word meaning what I think I want it to mean. And so from now on, when you see the word Weevil, and when I use it in this talk, I want you to think of physical play that is augmented by technology. It's not something that's focused on technology. It's play that's using technology to make it better. Physical real-world play that is either instigated or refereed or provocative. What's not the word?
Provocative.
Provocative. Provoked. That's the word. Provoked by technology. So I'm not talking about games like this, or unfortunately games like this. Look at that catch, unbelievable. But I'm also not talking about games like this, these sort of come out and play style field games or street games. And I love all three of these different types of games. That's just not what this talk is about. This talk really is focused on real world play with real-time digital interaction with it. And that's what it means to be applied Weevil. Cool?
Cool.
I also want to clarify that it's not about this either. This isn't somehow denigrating screen-based media or saying it's a bad thing or people should avoid making it or playing it. I'm totally cool with screens. I don't in any way support them being bashed, even if it looks as cool as this. This is a talk that's just about exploring a different kind of game, a different area of games, from the type of games that video game players often think about, digital game players. I even caught myself there, unbelievable. I will admit that I used to be a little bit more militant about this. I used to really want to sort of bury screen-based media, but I've come around. Actually, this is from an event that I co-curated with Doug Wilson at Baby Castles, which showed our work along with the work of Kaho Abe and Bennett Foddy. Funny story, they actually changed the name of the event to Quack the Screen because they thought this was too much. You know you've wandered too far when Baby Castles is censoring you? Kind of a weird thing to happen. But the reason why I'm really into these sort of experiences, I think this Arthur C. Clarke quote, and for those of you who don't know, Arthur C. Clarke, very famous science fiction author, died a few years back, and he's very well known for a lot of his work, but he's also really known for his 3 laws. His 3rd law being the most famous one that I think most people are pretty familiar. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And so he's saying as we get further and we create new things, they will seem more like the magic of old. So he's basically saying that these 2 things are equal. Or for the coders in the audience, equally. You don't like long talk but I think we can all agree that these 2 things are not equal. Or again, for the coders, not equal.
Thank you.
These are very different, right? And I think there's a reason why, right? There's a reason why we don't think of our smartphones as magic, but we think of wands as magic. And part of that is because we've worked so hard to beat the magic out of technology. We try so hard to try and make it seem useful or intuitive or straightforward. We want it to be something that we feel comfortable interacting with. And none of those words describe magic, right? And there's a reason for this. We do this for good reason, right? You don't want your experience with your smartphone to be scary or incomprehensible or mysterious or secret. You want it to be something that is straightforward and clear. But I think sometimes we take that a little too far, and we can start re-examining some of our day-to-day technologies and ways to make magical experiences just now and then, just using them every now and again to sprinkle a little magic into our lives. And so now for the super scary live demo to kick things off. I got a hand right there, sorry, his hand went up super early. He must have been reading the slide before I even started talking. So let's all welcome Chris to the stage. So if you read, you must be willing to put a box on your head.
I'm ready for the box.
All right, so first things first, first I want you to turn around. I'm going to put these on you. Got it?
I got it.
Do you hear this? Good. Don't demonstrate. You're going there. Okay, so this is from a game that I developed with Gigantic Mechanic, a Brooklyn-based game studio. This is from a game called Boxheads. Maybe not the most original name, but you get the point. And the idea behind this game was that you were going to make remote control humans with very simple technology. It wasn't inspired by, but I like to claim that it was inspired by this guy from Empire Strikes Back. The dude with the thing on his head, Chris. Don't worry about it. There's that scene where Lando does that thing on his watch, and that guy is like, and then starts doing things. So you are a nerd. Okay, good. And so using a common everyday device, and this is just a web page with 4 buttons on it, guys. This is not some sort of advanced technology and a $20 pair of Bluetooth headphones. I can turn Chris into my personal flying monkey. I wonder if he's going to understand this one. And this is weird, right? This is weird, right?
Wait,
Just try grabbing. I'm tempted to make him grab an audience member, but I'll stop right there. Thank you, Chris. You may remove the box from your head. And so this is something that's super fun, right? It makes you think of this. This is a game that we made with Sesame Street's blessing. We partnered with them on this game. It's a little bit louder than I want the music to be. There we go. In the real game, there's a cookie, and there's Cookie Monster and Elmo, each person being controlled by somebody else. And it's basically a big game of tag, where the cookie is trying to avoid being caught by Elmo and the Cookie Monster. We originally thought about having it just being parents being controlled by children, but it turns out children wanted to be in the boxes. And it's actually kind of fun to be in the box. We thought it'd be like this sweaty, horrible experience of being stuck in a box that you'd only do for your kids. But it turns out sort of fun to give up that control of yourself and just follow these instructions. And everything's more fun with Benny Hill music. But I really want to point out that the technology that's used in this game is anything that somebody who's been an MFA in this program can do in a couple of weeks, and you can quickly figure out how to do. I want to point out that Weevil games are nothing new. It's not like this is something that's been invented recently. This has been going on for a long time now. Laser tag is a super awesome Weevil game, as are Wii Sports. These guys are getting it done out there physically. And sometimes it's even used to actually create feelings of magical experiences. But unless somebody here is an Imagineer or working in a large studio with unlimited resources, this sort of stuff is kind of out of reach. And so I really want to talk about games and play experiences that use technology that's available to most people and things that most people can make to start experimenting with this sort of technology. And so I want to start by talking about one useful tool for making this sort of work that's present right now in this room that I'm actually using with this talk. And that is, any guesses? Somebody said it. Say it louder. Projector, yes. We think about projectors as things that create images in places we want images, right? We think about them as ways to make big screens, or make screens where there aren't screens usually. But that's not really the most magical way of thinking about projectors, right? The magical way of thinking about projectors is they paint the world with light. They create these images by putting light into a world. They alter the world that we are physically in. I put my hand here, it's white. I put my hand here, it's blue-ish. I put my hand here, it's green. I'm physically layering digital technology on top of a physical space. And that allows for a lot of possibilities. Some possibilities like this. This is an installation mapping project done by CloudPoint Media. And basically it takes this building and turns it into a moving sculpture. This is pretty good. This is pretty satisfying. And if you haven't seen one of these before, this feels kind of magical. At first. But it sort of fades quickly, because they are kind of just using this building as a big screen, right? They're just sort of playing interesting content on that big screen. And some projection mapping, including sort of this part a little bit of this projection mapping, but then I wrap it around again for time purposes, actually interact with the architecture of the building. But usually the architecture isn't built to sustain projection mapping. It ends up feeling kind of weird and unsatisfying in those situations. So another solution to this is to sort of contrive the world for projection to be on it. As is done with this piece, Augmented Sculpture by Pablo Valbuena. And this is a sculpture that he built that's just a bunch of cubes, but he's doing really interesting projection on it and really set up to expressly be projected on, to make this sort of interesting content that you can make when you have something that is meant to be projected, built to be projected on. This is a super beautiful work of art, and if you've ever seen this in person, I actually saw this in person at the Museum of Moving Image several years ago. It really does feel like you're seeing something magical, out of the ordinary, something that you don't see every day. Taking that to an extreme, contriving the physical world to be ripe for projection, is one of my projects that I work with my collaborator, Albert Huang, on, Lumarca. And what this is a bunch of string that has been placed precisely to be projected on by a single projector to create this sort of 3D imagery and shapes. I don't normally talk about this when I talk about Lumarca, but because I want this to be seen as something that is magical, but also an experience that people can understand, I want to explain a little bit about how this works, because this is not an expensive piece of technology. This is something anyone in this room can do. So I need 6 volunteers. Come on up. I think I saw exactly 6 hands, but maybe not. I might have to send one of you away. Might be one short. All right, each person, I want you to stand in front of one of these lines of light, sideways, so that you only take up that one line of light. There you go. Is that working? Hold on. Yeah, good enough. And so when I have these people as lines that I can light up with this projector, I can choose to select only some of them. I should ask for people with lighter colored shirts, but this is New York, no one has those. Or I can select other people. Or I can display a pattern on these people that can sort of be seen as a shape on them. And this is a very, very low resolution version of this, but you start to get the idea that each one of these people is standing in a slightly different spot from the projector's point of view, and you can project different content on each one of them. Thanks, guys. You can sit down now. Nice round of applause for our And so with Lumarca, that's basically all we're doing, is we're aligning strings to projection. We're just using a lot more strings than we had people up here. We're projecting on string instead of people, although projecting on people is a super awesome idea and totally something you should think about using for your Weevil games. But when you have that, when you have a ton of strings that are precisely aligned to a projector, each one of these strings is made for only 2 pixels of light. And that allows us to have a ton of strings in a small space that allows you to make this sort of 3D image. This is actually from a Unity version of Lumarca that I just started working on this summer, and allowed us to take advantage of some of the content and built-in technologies of Unity to make some really cool, interesting content that we didn't really have as an option before. One of the great things about Lumarca is that this system scales really, really well. So this is a 30-foot cubed Lumarca that we built in Guadalajara, Mexico for the Monitor Digital Festival. And we built it with a little path underneath the middle so that you could lay down and look up at it, and it would take up your entire field of view. And this was a super embedded, embodied, emotional, magical feeling when you had this sort of content going over your head. It really felt like, it was sort of the opposite of what you feel like when you put on a VR headset, that you're going into a digital world. This felt like the digital world had taken over our world, and you were just lying underneath it. It was a really, really powerful feeling. This one in particular felt like a wave was crashing down on you. I feel like the screen's a little too well lit for you guys to see it. But another great thing about Lumarca is that it is totally open source and DIY. So this one on the left that you can sort of see here, or your left, is from Germany. The one on the bottom over there is from Beijing Fashion Week in 2014. The one on the top there is from a public square in 2014 in Estonia. And I didn't make any of these. I didn't have a hand in making any of these. In fact, I didn't even know about 2 of these until I started doing research for this talk. Because Lumarca is totally open source and open hardware. So anyone who's interested in making their own or experimenting with it, please come find me, come talk to me after the talk. I would love to have your input. The Unity version is just getting going, so it's a little bit rough right now, but I would love to have more people making more Lumarcas, making more magic in the world with it. But so this is projection. This is a way to sort of drag digital technology into our world, but we still want to be able to interact with that technology. This is a really fun way to do that. This is Elliott Woods projection mapping on himself using the Kinect so that he can throw projection mapped fireballs in the real world. And if you listen very, very carefully, you can hear the Hadouken as each fireball is thrown. This is Andrew Hiranami. Did I say it right? Hiranami, yes. This is Andrew Hiranami's virtual ground, which creates a virtual play field for 2 players who must cooperate to try and light up this grid on the floor by selecting opposite sides with the ball. And this is just using open source CV libraries, computer vision libraries, with a ceiling mounted projector to create a virtual playfield that people are playing on top of. Gigantic Mechanics Shadow Play takes something that's normally an issue for projection-based media and actually turns it into a strength, and that's the player blocking the projector. In shadow play, that's what you're supposed to do, and they actually turn your shadow into your avatar. And this really helps get over things like lag or people understanding what their avatar is, because everybody can understand what their shadow is and how to manipulate it to play a game. Of course, you don't have to have projection to be Weevil. Just having camera is enough. This definitely counts as real-world play. Look at this guy. This is super performative. Look at him move his body. This guy isn't just wiping his hand around. You don't get this from tapping on a string, tapping on a screen, or moving your hand on a controller. This guy really feels like a ninja right now. And really good Kinect experiences can do that. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of really good Kinect experiences. I should know. I made one. This is from the game Deepak Chopra's Leela. Anybody played Deepak Chopra's Leela? Yeah, a couple of people here who actually helped work on it, maybe. A lot of New York designers actually worked on this game, and I was one of them. I'm going to speak specifically about the part I worked on, which was the breathwork part. Which this video is sped up to sort of show what it's doing, but it's tracking breathing in order to be visualized on a screen. And this was like a super cool technical problem to solve. How do you use a depth sensor to do that? How do you write the algorithms to work for different body types? I got it working for me in about a week and spent like 3 months trying to figure out how to get it working for different people with different body proportions, how to make something that'd be general enough to work for different people. But ultimately, the experience kind of lame. It worked as a sort of an interesting tech demo and nothing more. And part of that is there's nothing performative about this, right? It's not a super fun activity for the player to be, breathing. And for the most part, people don't find other people breathing to be that much fun to watch. And if you do, probably something wrong with you. And I bring this up in a talk where I'm talking about my work and hopefully talking up my work, because I also want to be honest that Weevil isn't a catch-all. Not everything you do with this is going to be awesome or cool. Some of it is still going to be like other games and not be that good. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves and critical and sometimes even self-critical of our work to point out some of the issues. And that's why I feel pretty comfortable saying that this game is awesome. This is the game that Frank was talking about at the beginning, Recurse. And it's a very simple input, and I think that's part of what makes this game fun. All you do is move as much as possible in the green areas, like shake it like this guy, and try to avoid as much as possible moving in the red areas. The more you move in the green areas, the more points you get. The more you move in the red areas, the more points you lose. This originally started as an installation game, sort of a lobby piece for the NYU Game Center, as Frank mentioned, but has since been ported to iPad and shown at various festivals and events around the world. One of the things that I think was really successful about this game was the fact that as you play this game, you don't see yourself. You don't see your avatar on the screen, and that's freeing. You see a version of yourself that's been abstracted, so that people aren't embarrassed by what they look like playing this game, because it does make you look pretty damn goofy. But then when the game ends, it reveals an image to yourself what you look like mid-gyration, often to the glee and shame of the people playing. And that's really part of the fun of the experience, is to see how ridiculous you looked while you're playing this game. The next piece I'm actually not going to talk about. I'm going to let them talk about it for you, and hopefully the volume's high enough.
So it's a game where there's a searchlight that's created by a projector, and the goal is for 2 people to cooperate to get all of the blocks out of the path of the searchlight as fast as possible. But if they're caught moving when the searchlight is on them, then it turns red and they both have to freeze. It's a projector with a Microsoft Kinect from the Xbox sitting on top of it, and that watches and uses its sort of camera and its depth sensing to detect when people are moving.
So fun, seriously. I'm actually out of breath at the moment because
that's how you know it's Weevil. She's out of breath.
Physical. You're playing it with a partner, that kind of thing. So I think that adds a good element of it. You know you can do it. So we've done it twice now, and every time it feels like we're getting close. It's really physical, and it brings out your competitive nature.
One of the goals was to have the technology not actually doing that much, and so it's not like a real video game where the technology is
not like a real video game I object to. It's a real digital game.
With just a little sort of touch of technology on top. But
so that touch of technology on top, I really like that, because I think that is a lot of what comes from Weevil, is just a little bit goes a very long way. And I find that people often fetishize technology when it comes to this sort of work, and I think it's more important to get a simple, clean, nice interaction right, rather than have a big, complicated thing and not over-focus on technology. And I see that happen a lot with these sort of games, so I'm really glad that you made this point. This game was made by Hide and Seek, by the way, sadly closed, formerly awesome, but the people who work there are still doing awesome work, game company out of the UK. But another thing that I think is really interesting about Searchlight that's actually going to segue into our next type of games is that it's using the Kinect to prevent people from moving. And this is a motion sensor, and they are using it to keep people from moving. And that's a really interesting twist on how digital technology can be used or misused to make these type of games. Like this piece. Anybody know where I'm going with this? Yeah, some people do. This is Ramsey Misty, or I'm going to leave that part for later. This is looks like an Atari joystick, right? Something that a lot of us have used and played with in different ways, but probably most of you haven't played with it the way it's going to be played with in this game. It's been slightly modified so that when you press the button, it makes a loud, repeated beeping sound. And when you hear that sound, that's how you know you lost. It's also in some sort of harness, which I will tell you is actually an S&M harness, that you strap to your crotch while being handcuffed behind your back. This is Sword Fight by Ramsey Misty and Kurt Beebe. And the way you play this game is you try and hit the button on the other person's joystick with your joystick. So you're actively thrusting at the other player's crotch with your crotch. And just this little bit of technology, it didn't take much, just this little thin veil of a game gets adults acting in public in a very unorthodox way. I should know. I'm really glad right now I didn't invite my mom to this talk. For the record, I am undefeated at sword fight. Played more than once. But this is definitely a Flywheel experience, and part of what makes for great Flywheel experiences is this sort of spectacle nature of them, right? If you saw two guys doing this as you're walking by them in the street, they would definitely stop, right? No matter where you were going or what you were doing, you'd be like, what's going on over there? And that spectacle nature brings a lot to Flywheel games. Another really interesting misuse of technology for Flywheel purposes is James George's Freefall High Score, which encourages you to do the last thing you'd ever want to do with your smartphone.
Oh, yeah.
Drop it from a great height. So Freefall High Score is an app that you can have on your iPhone or Android, although I think it has currently been pulled from both markets. I don't know if it ever actually made it onto the App Store, but it was definitely on the Android store for a while. And basically, you take your phone, you start the app, you take it somewhere, and you drop it, and it records how long your phone is in freefall. And then it stops recording once it feels a sudden jolt. And if your phone survives that sudden jolt, it uploads the score and the video it was taking as it was falling to the high score list. And so it sort of became this challenge for people that they were going to build like sort of the high school experiment with the egg drop. It's sort of like a high stakes version of that, because if you do it wrong, you don't break an egg. And it really only works, you only get on that high score list if your phone survives, but you also want to have that video. And so this is one really interesting solution.
Hi, my name is Tim. This is my preserver. It's the
They started calling them preservers.
There's a little hole in the bottom for the camera to peek out of, and some daisies on top.
That's him starting the app. He's closing it in the protector. And throwing it off a multi-story building. And this is the video. The phone lived because we have the video that got uploaded to the server. That's an awesome misuse of technology, right? Moringa, on the other hand, takes something that's normally considered rude and annoying and makes it a core mechanic of their game by encouraging people to point laser pointers at a projection screen. If anyone who's ever been to a movie theater where this happens, it kind of ruins the experience. But in Moringa, that is the experience. You're using these laser pointers, and it often starts off in sort of a chaotic mess, like you see here, and sort of resolves into a sort of a hive mind forming among the players, where they start to focus on individual areas of the screen as they better start to understand how it works and how they can defeat opponents. Although this is actually a pretty bad playthrough of Moringa because they're about to lose. But using a laser pointer, encouraging people, it's also an easy way to add more players. You just hand out more laser pointers, and you easily level up how many players you have playing this game. Yeah, they lost. This is a game that probably most of you are familiar with, but maybe not in this form. A lot of people don't know that Johann Sebastian Joust started off as a Wiimote hack. So this was a hack of Wiimote technology, but also similar to the Searchlight, it's using an accelerometer to try and prevent you from accelerating. The way you play Joust is you have to hold a controller in your hand and try to move it as little as possible. And so it's something that's made to encourage movement is now being made to prevent movement, to discourage movement. I think this is an awesome video. I like showing the Wiimote hack version of it, specifically because I don't think there's been a better play than the one that's about to be made in this video right here. Oh! Count. And this is probably the game I'm most jealous I didn't come up with. Doug Wilson's real masterpiece. Next, I'm going to talk about the Hearst collection, which uses laser sensors, which are normally used to keep people out and made invisible, to make a super enticing laser maze that you have to try and get through. They fill the room with a smoke machine so that you can actually see where the lasers are. They say there's a hidden piece of art somewhere inside of that laser maze, and you're supposed to crawl through it and try and find it and get it. And they put the smoke in there, so normally lasers are invisible, but they put the smoke in there so you can see them so that you can have a chance of getting in and out. It's got a very low success rate. But it's super fun and it's a super great spectacle as people try to contort their bodies to get through a maze like this. That was a good one. I think she actually wins. No, she's about to hit her head, isn't she? I've watched this video so many times and I still don't remember. You don't get to know. Look it up yourself. Hearst collection. It's an awesome game. And finally, I want to talk about games that use screens to encourage real-world play. And this might seem weird, again, for a talk entitled Beyond the Screen, but again, this isn't about screen bashing. This isn't saying that screens are bad, and there's lots of ways that you can use a standard technology like a screen to encourage and facilitate real-world play. One excellent example of that is Ivan Safran's developed with Baby Castles a game called Side Scroller. And basically, you try and get your avatar, it's like a space shooter where you try to get your avatar to the other side of the screen, but when it reaches the other side of the screen doesn't advance, you do. You have to run through an obstacle course to see the next place you're going to play. You move to the next screen along. Sometimes through a tunnel, sometimes through people having a party, sometimes into a ball pit. You have to negotiate these real-life obstacles as you're trying to play this game and racing to get to the end of it. And moving from screen to screen. And he just won. This is a super awesome Weevil game that hopefully most of you have played, and if not, you should play it. So find somebody here to play it with tonight because it's an amazing game. This is Space Team, and since most of the people seem to know it, Space Team is basically a game about yelling. It's a game where you have certain instructions on your screen and other people have instructions on their screens, and you can't fulfill all the instructions that are given to you on your screen, so you have to get the other players to perform that task for you. So you're yelling at them to try and complete their task, while they're yelling at you, trying to get you to complete their task, often with hilarious names like Caramelize Onions. You have a panel called Caramelize, and the button will say onions, or vice versa. It says onions, and the button says Caramelize. And this is what it looks like when people play. This isn't really the screenshot for. This isn't really the screenshot for Space Team. This is really the screenshot for Space Team. Screaming is awesome, the guy just said.
Shake it now!
Managing full, oh that's me!
Enable mono.
Oh, that's me is another thing that happens a lot.
Jump beat this.
Oh, I have demons. Poke large rotoscope. Enable Q
Bend
ring.
fever to 1.
Who gets to one? Who gets to one?
Flap grid dryer.
Set bent fiber to 2.
Flap
Rotate
grid
managing
dryer.
bulb.
She's really mad about that grid dryer. This is another game that I made a long time ago with Corey Mencher and Xiaoying Feng. The idea behind it is, if you're playing a first-person shooter, often you have a little map telling you where all your friendlies are, where you are, and where all your enemies are. And the idea is, what if we took that out into the real world? And so your phone acts as that heads-up display for the real world, letting you know where people on your team are, where people on the other team are, where you are, so that you can play hide-and-seek in a park or a large-scale area, running around as you're doing it. And so it sort of has that same effect that the map has in a first-person shooter, where you're looking at that to get close to somebody, but once you're close to somebody, you're looking around at your actual surroundings to see where they actually are in relation to where you are. And this was a really fun experience. And finally, I was fortunate enough to work with lead designer Greg Trefry, who's actually here right now, hi Greg, on a game called The Sim, or Senate Immersion Module. which is kind of a giant LARP for high school kids to learn about the Senate, which sounds like a weird thing, but it's actually super fun. And it uses digital technology to facilitate this. Each student comes into this replica of the Senate building in DC and is given a tablet that acts as their chief of staff. It tells them what state they're from. It tells them what their state's concerns are, what their party's concerns are, and really does a lot of the legwork that a lot of LARPers have to do on their own, coming up with their backgrounds and their histories and the things that are important to them as they play through this experience, so that there's a very low onboarding barrier to entry to this game, and people can start playing it right away, and the screen really facilitates that ability to communicate, tell you have a meeting with this other senator in this location at this time, to try and make it so that people can really focus on the role playing and less focus on memorizing this data, and really helps communication. In some ways, it's sort of the anti-space team, because it's really using this tablet to help facilitate this real world interaction. So hopefully these references have been useful to you and will inspire you to make your own Weevil games. This is Kapoho Albe's Hit Me, and I want to use this game to illustrate. There's all sorts of people making these types of games. Kapoho is a solo designer. This is a super fun game. She made all these parts herself. She's put cameras on top of these boxes, on tops of helmets with buttons in them that are all connected wirelessly for this really awesome, violent, based on Jean-Claude Van Damme movie experience. If you ever get a chance to play Hit Me, I highly recommend it. And this is a solo developer's project. To projects like this, turn down the thumping bass a little bit, that is made by 2-Bit Circus. This is their touring carnival called Steam Carnival that takes the standard dunk tank and turns it into a flambe tank, where instead of being engulfed in water, you're engulfed in giant plumes of hotness and fire and engulfed in that. And these guys just got $6.5 million in venture capital money to keep doing stuff like this. Yeah, seems insane, right? So I will say most people who are doing Weevil games are not getting that kind of money, but it's good to know that there are people who are starting from the ground up, not at these giant companies, able to secure that sort of funding. The last example I'm going to leave you with, though, this is from a game called 2.8 Hours Later. It has a very, very small technical component to it. Anyone played 2.8 Hours Later? Mostly based in the UK. Very nice. Mostly based in the UK. But one of the really interesting things about this game, it's largely just a zombie chase game, right? And there are a lot of those zombie chase games out there. But what happens is the zombies actually have UV dye on their hands. And so if they touch you while you're running, at the end of the game, they scan you, and they just run a UV light over you. And if they see any zombie fingerprints on you, you're infected. And you get dressed up and made into a zombie for the rest of the night. And this is just a very light touch that makes this game feel a little bit more magical that you wouldn't have if this was a purely physical game. So I want to leave you with this is actually Arthur C. Clarke's lesser known second law, but I think it's a good inspiration for people who are trying to make Weevil content. And so hopefully you guys will stick around if you guys are interested in this. There are great organizations and events that host lots of Weevil games. Some of these games are hard to play at home, but there are festivals and events you can go to, like Come Out and Play. And I highly encourage you guys to come out and attend these games and start trying to make these games yourself. So thank you.
A couple questions. We'll do a little Q&A, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A.
Like a box set.
So right here in the middle, right here.
Blocked my hash there.
Yeah, well, that's all right. This is a topic that resonates with me quite a bit. I've also explored, kind of experimented with games that take place in the real world, and I want to prompt you a little bit more to talk about the critical side of this. You're saying this is not really a critique of the standard way that people think about video games, but in some ways it is. And one of the ways I sometimes think about this is almost like as a return of the repressed. You know what I mean? There's this Freudian term that if you keep some primal force, constrained for too long, eventually it's going to come out in some other way. And do you think that that's a part of it, like in a weird way that video games games, you showed sports and physical games, and games have always been so much this social thing and this physical thing, and they involve bodies and faces. And then video games came along, and it was so much about our kind of solitary engagement with these systems, these deep, fascinating, compelling systems inside the machine. And then, are we now seeing a kind of return of some of these more primal forces that were kind of left out of the traditional video game?
I guess in some ways, sports are still super popular, right? It's not like sports are going anywhere and sports need any help. I think they're still super popular. I think there has been sort of a divide, though, between people who enjoy sports and people who enjoy video games. I think actually that divide has been bridged a lot more by the sports people at this point than the video games people, especially people who love playing sports video games. But a lot of people who play video games aren't interested, and design video games, frankly, aren't interested and don't have any connection with sports at all. I think that this is less of a rebellion and more of a, I guess I really want to frame Weevil games as sort of the best of both worlds. And I really want this to be something that you can create these new experiences that weren't possible with just purely physical experiences, but also not possible with purely digital experiences. And so I think combining those two things in a real world setting, making it feel like a more magical experience, is really something that we're just starting to get more of. And we've had some big companies do this in the past, like I talked about laser tag, and there have been these sort of large scale versions. But I think it is something now that smaller designers are starting to get more and more interested in. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to focus on those type of games for this talk, to sort of let the kind of people who come to the Game Center see that it's possible, this is within their reach. You don't have to have a giant budget where you can build custom hardware to start experimenting with making these type of games.
Do you see this as a glimpse of something that is going to become more and more prominent as the more kind of real world gets colonized by the virtual, right? As our rooms become intelligent, they know who's in them, our cars start driving themselves, objects know where they are in the world, and the borderline between the sort of the digital and the informational and the virtual is kind of blurred with the physical and the real. I mean, do you think that we're gonna start to see more and more of these kinds of games?
No. Well, and with an explanation.
Right, okay.
Because I think it goes back to that thing I talked about early in the talk about when we expose people to technology, we are often trying to make it as straightforward and comfortable as possible,
right,
and not focus on these sort of playful experiences. And so I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that you can play a game with your thermostat or your room lighting, and that there are these sort of weird, wacky experiences. But I bet those are going to be one-offs and edge cases, and it's mostly going to be the most convenient, most straightforward, less, one of the key things you learn when you first start doing installation design is hide the projector. That automatically makes things a little bit more exciting. People are like, oh, that projector is projecting there. You put that in a box, and it's part of it. Like, whoa, where's this light coming from? And it can make things feel much more more exciting and magical. And I think that's not what you want in your day-to-day life. You don't want that in your home. You want things to be super accessible and easy. And so I think we will start to see more of these experiences, but they will always be on the fringe. I don't think they will be more mainstream.
That's interesting. I mean, because I've often thought that, most of the work that I've done in this domain, or the work that I've seen, the stuff that you've shown, people like blast theory, and all of these kinds of fascinating experiments that have happened. I've often thought that eventually one day there will be some kind of mainstream expression of this. Like someone will come along with the equivalent of like Pokemon that has some location-aware or physical or real-world thing.
Somebody, somebody would take that on.
Are
you joking?
No.
Because they're doing that right now.
Oh, they are?
Yeah. That the game Ingress, it was like a Google game.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
It wasn't that good, but it wasn't that bad either. It was
People know
interesting.
Ingress. It's kind of an alternate reality game that Google did. It was kind
and
of
I think it was largely just to figure out where people were and map their locations. So for the next game that they're making now, which is actually a partnership with Nintendo, where I don't know if anyone's, oh man, I wish I could just bring up the trailer for it. Yeah. It's a really hard sell of what Weevil can be, and really unrealistic. It really goes beyond the realms of reality, but it's basically like there's a Pikachu 2 blocks away, and you have to go over there and try and catch Pikachu. And it's like a physical, real world, gotta catch them all, running around in real world space to try and figure out where these Pokemon are so that you can capture them, and then your phone is sort of the Pokeball, and you can find other people to battle, and you have to go there physically to battle with them. I don't think it's gonna work.
Yeah.
I think you know, maybe I'm wrong. It honestly doesn't seem like the best expression of these type of games.
I love it.
But I to see where it goes.
Yeah, no, this is what I love about this is the honesty that you get, because like the whole point of your talk is to promote these ideas and talk about what's beautiful and interesting and great about them, but you don't feel the need to like BS it. Like most people feel like, oh, you got to go all in on this thing and anything that has anything to do with it. But as soon as you describe that, I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? Even though it literally has Pokemon attached to it and it's being done by Google, you know,
with Nintendo.
Yeah, with Nintendo, the most ubiquitous. Like we both know, having built these kinds of things, what they do and how they do and don't work, right? And they don't work like that, right? They don't work like, oh, I'm going to go 2 blocks out of my way to go catch this thing.
Yeah, I think, and to clarify, it's not like no one's going to play it. A lot of people are going to play it, and what you're going to end up with is like a small niche, super hardcore community who really loves this thing and is always trying to get their friends to do it, and their friends are just like, no, that ain't happening.
Right.
But it's going to, like this, I bet you that game is going to be like the purpose of somebody's life, and multiple somebody's life, but it will be like this really weird, and Ingress is like that for some people.
Sure.
It's like this really like dedicated few, this really small kernel. I don't think this experience, and part of it is just Magic doesn't last, right? Magic is, once Magic becomes every day, then it gets kind of boring and mundane. And so you constantly, and it's part of the reason why I don't think it will go mainstream. I think you'll have moments of things hitting the mainstream radar, seeming cool, but I think, you know, if, even looking at technologies like Oculus, I feel like, oh, that's cool, and then like, eh. Like, I feel like they're just gonna, like, there'll be like very few peaks and lots of valleys on these things. And we have to appreciate those peaks while they're around, and try and hit them as hard as we can while they're available.
So I want to see if I can tease that out even a little bit more. Let's see if we can understand a kind of broader design lesson from this idea of magic, right? That you're working on in some of these projects, where part of the pleasure, part of the joy, part of what's interesting and cool about them is their novelty and surprise, and the fact that it is kind of a trick that's using technology to do something weird and cool that hasn't been done before. How do we get from that? I mean, is that enough on its own? And are we saying, yeah, just like do some of those? Or is there a way to get from that to something that is more like the Pokemon that we know and love, right? The Pokemon that became, you know, more than just the life purpose for a very small, hardcore niche community, but like something that for a whole generation of people became this you know, this touchstone, this cultural work.
I mean, maybe I'm biased because I don't want that. Maybe I'm biased, like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't want to push for that because it's not what when I think of these experiences, I think of it something like it's like going to a magic show. You don't want to go to a magic show every day. That would be boring, right? Like, you want to go there and you want to be, if you see the same trick twice, you're like, seen it already. So kind of like comedy, right? If you see the same guy who performed a routine, you're like, oh, I know that joke. It's funny the first time, like not so funny the second time. And so I think if you really want to have these heightened experiences, they have to be like a thing you go to, an experience you have once, something that can still be very inspiring, very life-changing, very impactful, but something that just hits you really hard once, really changes your life just for an evening or just for a day and stays with you throughout the years, but not something that you're going to be doing every day, not something that, and you know, I could be wrong, there could be someone out here right now in the audience who's going to make a Weevil game that, Weevil.
We're not going to, no one's going to say it.
I knew you would say it. But yeah, I really feel like just giving someone a taste of magic. That's why in the Harry Potter films, they're not like just doing the same spell every time. Harry's continually shocked by magic, and he lives in the magical world. Like by the ninth movie or however many movies they were, he's still like, whoa, what's that?
Yeah, I don't have to make it up.
And we need to see that through Harry's eye, because like literally after the first movie, a broomstick is a bicycle, and it's not exciting at all anymore. He's just playing with this thing where like, yeah, whatever. And so they need to keep introducing new things. Even for people who are supposedly living in the magical world, they need to keep making it more new so that it stays magic for those people.
Interesting. That's a great answer. So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the relationship between your work as a creative person and writing code, right? Because I want to ask about, so one of your responsibilities on the faculty is to be one of the primary kind of voices for code at the table when we're talking about the process of making games. It was something that we were always kind of a little thin on, you know, because part of our identity at the Game Center is that we're not an engineering school, right? But at the same time, we understand that there's this deep relationship between games and game design and computation, right? Not just if you're making video games, but somehow there's like this deep resonance, even if you're making board games, between the way of thinking about the world that is embodied in writing software and these works. So I guess I want to just briefly ask, like, how do you think, how are we doing right now in terms of how we approach this difficult challenge? How are we doing in terms of teaching code?
I personally, I think all parts of making a game are game design. When you're making the visuals, you're communicating to the player. When you're making the sounds, you're also communicating to the player, you're making things feel good, bad. I'm biased, but I feel like code is the most close to game design of any of the parts of the game, because you're making actual gameplay decisions as you're coding something. If someone is a game designer and they're not a coder, and they say, make it so that he can jump, he's not talking at all about, like, even if a game developer is just a developer, not a designer, he's still doing design because he's figuring out what it means to jump. What are the physics behind the jump? How high can you jump? How long can you jump? Can you only jump in these particular situations? And it's something that is a conversation back and forth, but often those design decisions are made on a level that a game designer who doesn't understand how to program doesn't even understand. Doesn't really understand that system, and so some of those decisions have to be made by the coder. And that's why I think it's so important that we have classes. We have at least one required programming class here, because not everyone's going to be a game developer who's going to be developing their own engine or working at that level. In fact, most people are not. Most people aren't even going to be the lead programmer on a game that they're working on. But I think you need to understand the intricacies of code and the logic that happens in code and the decisions in code if you're going to be a person who is a game designer working with coders, working with digital games. I think there's a lot of biases there that you have to have some familiarity, know how to talk to a game developer, a game programmer, if you're going to be a game designer. And I really feel like programming is like the literacy of this century. I think by the end of the century, if there's a kid who can't program, it's going to be like the last century with a kid who couldn't read. And it really is going to be something that everyone needs to have at least some basic knowledge of. And we're headed towards it, so we might as well pick it up now, guys.
Wow, yeah, that's great. Do you sometimes meet people for whom they're just, it's almost like a brick wall? Or do we have, because everyone learns to code, everyone in the Game Center, but some people take to it and some people don't, and it can be a real challenge. And we're not trying to turn everyone into programmers, but but as you say, we do want them to have this fundamental literacy. What happens when you have a student that is for whom it is like a brick wall, where there's a lot of struggle there? Like what are some techniques to get them through that wall, over that wall?
I actually say to my students a lot that a lot of it is like hitting a brick wall, and you just have to bang your head on it till the wall falls down.
It's like a regular brick wall. That's what we do with actual brick
exactly.
wall.
Yeah. But I honestly believe that there's obviously a spectrum of how people take to programming or take to anything. Some people are much better at it and take to it right away. Some people are slower at it and it's harder for them. I think, if you're good enough to get into a program like this, you're smart enough to learn how to code already. I think almost anyone can learn how to code. And there are things that seem so, like we have to learn how to walk. Right? We're not born knowing how to walk. It takes us like a year-ish. How long does it take people to walk? It takes a while. It trips sometimes still. Yeah, we're still not great at it. I used to do stand-up comedy, and I remember like when I first was performing, I thought, oh, like I'm going to be really good at this, and I wasn't. I was terrible. Everyone's terrible when they start. And then as I was doing it longer and longer, I'd see people performing for the first time, and I'm like, ooh, who told you this was a good idea? Who made you think that you could actually do this? And then I'd see that same person performing 6 months later, and I'm like, better. Not always good, but always better. Always better. And the more you keep doing, and we think of, talent is such a big part of things, and it is. But if I played basketball for 20 years and Michael Jordan never played basketball, I would be a better basketball player than him. And he obviously, if he played for 20 years and I played for 20 years, he's going to crush me. But I really think that we overemphasize talent and we underemphasize hard work. We underemphasize sticking with it and just keeping at it. I really think any skill can be developed if you just give it the time. And it's going to become faster for some people than others, but if you work it, you will get there.
You mentioned this kind of tension between video games and sports, but in hearing you talk about like the process of getting good at coding, it sounds very similar to like what it's like to master a physical task or to get good. We do have this kind of like sense that it is magic, but in fact it is hard work. Do you think that there's an underlying connection between these things? Like these are things that you love and are really into. You know, I'm thinking sometimes of like the stats heavy sports fan. Are you one of those? Do you think of sports in terms of the like sabermetrics and the quantitative analysis of players, and is that a relationship to kind of code and computation?
Yeah, and you've seen big changes. How many people watched the World Series this year? See, this is what I'm talking about.
Just really quick, who prefers basketball to baseball? So some people.
How many people watched the finals last year? The NBA finals.
NBA finals. So about the same.
Define watch.
Actively enjoy.
Okay, what about a show of hands for esports? Raise your hand if you're watching like the League of Legends World Finals or the StarCraft WCS.
A little bit more.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, and and I often try to, prophesize sports to our community and
Why we will.
yeah, and Weevil as well. I'm a trendsetter, dude. But it's slow going. I'm not gonna. We have had some fans who have been formed here at the Game Center, but it's a process. Part of it might be my fault for starting with the Brooklyn Nets. Maybe not the greatest team to. I should have made everyone Yankees fans, although they suck now. Anyway, you know what? Screw the Yankees. Anyway, but I do think that there is. What was the question?
Is there a connection? Because sometimes these things seem like they're opposite ends of the spectrum of life. Over here, you're catching a ball. Over here, you're writing an algorithm. But do you think there is a connection?
I honestly think that it's just a connection of how humans work. I think you work something, you get better at it. And that's why I love to use comedy as an example of that, because holy shit, does that seem like just a natural thing that you're good at or you're not? And it's not. You have to work comedy. You have to rehearse. And every single person I saw doing comedy over time got better and better. And it seems like you're just naturally funny or you're not. Nobody was naturally funny. I did comedy for 10 years, and there were people who came in and I was like, they've got something. But no one who came in and were like, that's already a stand-up comic right there. This is their first time performing. They're going to be a huge star. And so I really feel like that's just how humans work. You do something over and over again, and you get better at it. And sometimes you'll never get good at it because you just don't have that in your arsenal. It's just not how your brain works, but you will get better at it. And I think, I think the same thing is true of us physically. Like if I had spent my entire youth trying to be a professional athlete, I probably just don't have the goods. Like it just wasn't there for me. I wish it was. I would love to be a pro athlete. It wasn't there for me. But I would have been in a lot better shape. I would have been a lot closer if I dedicated my life to that. And I think that there should be more appreciations across disciplines because of that. I think the stats stuff that happens in sports should be super interesting to people who are more math-oriented, more video game-oriented, more digital game-oriented. But I think it's a slow process, and I think a lot of it is sort of built up resentments that computers were sort of seen for nerds for a long time, and jocks would pick on the nerds, and it's like this weird thing that I think largely that part has gone away, but there's still some resentment towards sports that lingers because of that.
You mentioned open source at one point. Is that an important topic for you in your work? Do you think that's? How important is that for you?
I think open source is a great thing for the right situation. I think a lot of people act like it's sort of there are people who take it too far. There are people who act like it's a responsibility for people to open source things. And I really think it should be up to the individual creator whether or not they want to share what they're working on. I think it can be a great resource for people. Adam Saltzman open sourcing Cannibal, for example. I now use Cannibal assets in class for a lot of my assignments. I think that's a great thing for people to have access to see what the actual assets in that game are and try and use them in their own work. So I think it could be hugely beneficial, but I never want to pressure people into doing that, because open source, if you're really doing open source, it's a huge amount of work. I get emails from people all the time who don't know anything about programming and want to make a Lumarca, and I always have to figure out where I'm going to draw the line of how much I'm going to help this person, because I try to do good support for it, but I can only do so much support for it. I have another project that's open source called Proclipsing, which is about making it easy to do processing projects in Eclipse, which is a sort of more advanced editor for working with code. And I get nothing but grief for that. I have thousands of people using it, but the emails I get is like, this broke. New version of processing came out, doesn't work on Linux. And I'm like, dude, I don't have a Linux machine, I can only do so much. And you know, there are a lot of people consuming it, but there's not a lot of people helping out with it. And I actually started this project with 2 other coders, and they kind of moved on. And so I'm the only person, and I keep having to decide every time a new version of processing comes out, a new version of Eclipse comes out, how much I'm going to work to support and make this thing. And I have a big decision looming, because it's actually a Google Code open source project right now. And Google Code is going away shortly. In a couple months, they're taking it down. And I have to decide whether or not I want to do the work to move it over to something like GitHub to try and keep this project alive that has basically a lot of pain for me, but a lot of pleasure for a lot of other people. So I think it is good to do that. I think one of the upsides of open source, honestly, is a lot of free publicity. Those Lumarcas that were made that I didn't make, that's great for me. Lumarca in Estonia. I've never been to Estonia, but Lumarca has. I've never been to Beijing, but Lumarca has. But I think it really is up to the individual creator to decide whether or not it's worth the effort, because it can frankly be a huge amount of effort to open source their projects.
You mentioned VR, and I just want to briefly ask whether, you know, like, how do you see that fitting into the stuff that you're interested in? You talked about like these things that are more experimental, and they're not necessarily meant to be big, large scale, commercially successful, mainstream, or but it seems like we're poised on some very large forces in culture trying to make some of these things that are magic in that way into big commercial successes. What's your take? Are you short on that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say I'm short on that. I think I want to be clear that I don't think Weevil experiences are never going to be profitable or make money, or you can't build a business around them. I think you can't build a business that lives in someone's home that they're doing on their own. I think it's much more about going to a venue and experiencing these things. I think there's a ton of Weevil experiences at places like theme parks, like Disney World has a lot of those. And I actually, I've reworked this talk several times, so I have about 20 references of things that didn't actually make the cut into this talk. But there's lots of experiences that you want to go and interact with at a location. You will pay to interact with at that location. And I think that's where VR is going to end up as well. I don't think people are going to be sitting around their house like doing this with a controller. We had the HTC Vive here a few weeks ago, and some of you people probably experienced that. Those of you who didn't, it was actually a head-mounted display, but you actually had these things in your hand, and you were actually physically moving through space that moved you through the virtual space. So it was to me, that was by far the best VR experience I've ever had. But I'm never going to put one in my home. But I would go to a place that had like a bunch of rooms of those, and then I pay some money to be in that room for an hour and play through an experience, especially if I can play in that space with some other friends. I think that would be an amazing experience. And so I think that, personally, to me, that's where I think VR is going to end up. It's going to end up living at places like Dave & Buster's, at places like theme parks, at places that are specifically made like laser tag arenas, right? People aren't playing laser tag at home that much, but there are laser tag like companies that have been very successful for a very long time. And that's where I really think we're going to see VR ending up. I don't think it's a bust. I don't think that there's nothing to be learned there, but I don't think it's something that, I don't think it was a good buy for Facebook, for example, to buy Oculus. I don't think that that's the next wave of technology in our home.
Yeah. Let's open it up to the audience and see if there are any questions. Yeah.
So you're talking about Weevil experiences never hitting the mainstream.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to argue that they already kind of have, in a way, in terms of Weevil sports. Something like fencing, for example, uses like digital machines in order to score keep, and that like radically changes the strategy in fencing. Or if you're talking about like football, like instant replay cameras that the referees can use changes the game entirely.
Does it though? So I'm going to push back on this a little bit. I agree with you. This is actually something that I thought about in my talk, and I agree that I think it's a fine blurry line, but I think I know which side of the line I'm on. And football as a core experience, I don't think has changed because of added to digital technology. I think the spectatorship of it has changed with like the first down marker and things like that. You will get plays called reversed by instant replay, and that happens in a number of sports now. I think the fencing example is actually, does it score differently than people would, or just more accurately?
More accurately.
See, more accurately, I still feel like you're not changing the core experience then, unless people knew how to take advantage.
I mean, like as a fencer, like part of the strategy, especially if you were doing it like non-digitally, was taking advantage of the referee and knowing the referee's habits.
Okay, so maybe that is the case, and you start to see some of that in tennis as well, where they can, challenge the referee whether or not a ball was in or out. And there are these experiences. But do you feel like fencing is a different sport now that it has this technology, or does it just sort of tweaked it a little bit?
I guess just tweaked.
Yeah, I mean, I again, it's a fine line, and I don't know exactly where to draw it. I don't know exactly what's on the different side of the line, but I feel like having a little bit of better officiating from technology is not the same as having technology be core to changing the experience. And that's my personal belief.
Can you imagine a physical sport built from the ground up to include this kind of thing? So instead of the way fencing has evolved gradually to incorporate that, what about like an esport that is physical, but that has built into it? So something like Kahoabe's Hit Me. I wonder, like sometimes I think that's, and maybe we'll get there by dialing down the magic, right? Maybe the way to get it out of the theme park is to say, okay, this isn't a novelty. It's not about like, gee whiz. This is just a great game. Something like Ultimate Frisbee or Hacky Sack or something,
I actually think the closest thing that we have to having that happen is Joust. I think Joust is like, and at one point I was 100% convinced that we were going to see like Joust leagues. That we were going to see like, Joust night, like we have bowling night, and there was going to be regular communities. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe that is happening, but I feel like I would have heard about it. I talk to Doug pretty often. And so like, I feel like if that didn't do it, I don't know what is, because I feel like that to me is like kind of the best flywheel game, the most accessible. You watch people play one round and then you want the controller and you know what you're supposed to do. But it also allows for really deep and highly skilled play. I've seen people like, I thought I was really good at Joust until I played against Rami Ishmael, and that guy's just a beast. Like, I was like, holy crap, this guy's way better at this game. I thought I was good. This guy has got a skill level that I don't have at this. And I think you could get I think you could make a version of Joust where you have somebody who, if they're playing against a bunch of people who've never played Joust before, he's going to beat them every time. The same way you get with sports that have that sort of following. And the fact that that didn't happen makes me a little skeptical. I mean, maybe it's just a matter of time. Maybe it's going to happen eventually. But I'm a little bit of the mind of Joust can do it, what can?
Do you think maybe that was partly, the intent? Like it was meant to be kind of a party game and casual. And Doug has these very strong ideas about like not pushing it too much in the direction of serious organized competition. And so in some ways this is an expression of his ideas. And if he decided that he wanted to push in that direction, maybe I think he could, right? But he would be forced to maybe do some things he doesn't want to do, which is like enforce some rules that he prefers to have be ambiguous,
But I feel like it would happen without I don't know if you need the creator of the game to be the one who shepherds it into a sport if it has the right audience around it. So I don't know that the onus is on Doug to make that happen. And you could easily, if we wanted to, we could start an NYU Game Center Joust League, right? And then we could set some ground rules. Yeah, maybe we'll have someone here tonight who's going to start it. And we could set ground rules for playing in that competition that are not the rules. It's sort of like Magic tournaments, right? Like different Magic tournaments, The Gathering, not the Weevil Magic, have different rules that, are set up by these different organizations. And so I don't feel like, you do get these top-down, sort of esport things like League of Legends, but you also get these sort of self-organized tournaments. And like Magic, at the beginning, they weren't having tournaments that were organized by Wizards of the Coast. They were tournaments that were organized by people in local communities making their own. It wasn't like a top-down thing, and so maybe that's just yet to happen for Joust, or maybe Joust wasn't the game for some reason to make that happen. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope that we're going to see that new Plyweevil sport. Maybe it'll be called Plyweevil Ball.
Yeah, maybe.
This is quick. I graduated at NYU Poly in journalism and technical writing 4 years ago, and went to law school for 2 years. But I have a question. In regards to Joust and sports, EA sports with this sweating makes it active. How does it connect? Can you connect this to military simulation with the Army, Marines? Like, I mean, could it be like connected to military in some form? And going on this, that magic can only happen once to be good. In the military, once is good enough. In the military, winning strategy.
I'm always a little afraid to answer that, and I don't know that I know how to. I mean, I think once might be good enough in the military, but you practice a million times to get that once right.
One shot, one kill, and
Yeah, but you don't like shoot once and then like that's the first time you shot a gun. You like practice for like 4 years and then you get to shoot at something they think you're good enough to shoot at.
But in real war, it's
Yeah, but I mean, definitely you can use digital technology to enhance your ability to commit war, and I think we do all the time. It doesn't seem magical or playful. I feel like I just really want to distance myself
But do you think,
from military simulations.
Do you think the kind of games that we're looking at here help us reflect on some of these issues of like remote controlled warfare and and drones and...
I mean, I don't get into this often, but I do think about that a little bit with like box sets. Like, I'm just giving orders, following someone or giving someone's orders, and they just following them blindly, literally blindly following my orders. And I've seen people use that to walk people into walls and to walk them into a curb and make them trip. And somebody in particular in the audience is continually walking someone into a wall over and over again. And so, I think it does start to get some of those questions of responsibility of what do you do when you're in control? What are you doing when you have somebody who's agreed? Where's the trust? It's almost like some of Robert's work about violating trust and respecting trust between two parties that have consented on an agreement, and then there's sort of sometimes these unspoken, sometimes spoken understandings between them, and what happens when those get violated. I think there is some interesting possibilities there.
Yeah, and even on a concrete level, there's a sense in which like an amazing amount of innovation and invention happens within the context of military research.
Yeah.
And it's partly the responsibility of creative people to extract those things, the swords into plowshares, right? And the idea that like it was in the pursuit of accurate artillery that we kind of mastered these ideas of like calculus and like the kind of math of moving objects. But then we take those ideas, like part of what I think a game designer's job is to do is to like think of other applications of some of the same ideas.
Thanks for your talk. It was really good. One thing I just want to mention here is I think what I really like about these projects is that they, in a way, they also do the opposite of magic. What they help is for people to demystify technology and actually see how technology works. And so when people play these games, they actually, for instance, the Cookie Monster game, they get to understand some of the systems behind more complex games. And I think looking at projects from that angle can also be inspiring and interesting because it empowers the users to look at games not as magic necessarily, but as like I feel like my iPhone is magic because I don't understand how it works. It's completely opaque. But these games allow me to get a peek into how technology works, and I think that's also an aspect that I feel very empowering about this project.
To some extent, I can see what you're saying, and I guess what I'll say, the part of that I really agree with is that I think you can get people to play these sort of Plyweevil games that you will not get people to play digital games. And this is something that I see every year at Come Out and Play. For all the different conferences and festivals and game events I go to, no other event comes close to the amount of diversity that you get at Come Out and Play. You get people from all ages, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds that come out and play, coming to play these big physical games. And I think it just appeals to an audience in a way because it is this big spectacle of play that is kind of unique for people. I remember distinctly the first time I showed Recurse at Come Out and Play, this mother kept dragging her teenage daughter and son back into line to play over and over again because she was better than them at it. It was like, oh, a video game I can beat my kids at, awesome. And so I do think that there's something about, we talk a lot about wanting a more diverse group of game makers, we want a more diverse audience for games. I think these type of games really do open it up to those people and really do try and make this a more, an event that, type of experience that more people who are not already steeped in game tradition are willing to try and engage with. Even games like Sword Fight, like you can get people to play that game who would never play Angry Birds. Back with the hat, maybe?
Yeah. Any questions? Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. Where we go here, and then we'll go there. So here first. Yes.
First, thank you very much for the talk. I very much enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about the word Weevil and what it means.
Thank you.
I'm going to learn a lot. But beyond that, what I wanted to talk about was in your discussion about Weevil games becoming as big as something like an e-sport or a sport. One of the things that I thought about was the exactness of the technology in Weevil games, and that how that may be a disservice to one of the most important parts of a game in a large setting, the spectator. For the most part, in a lot of different games, sports games, one of the most memorable things about it is the lack of exactness in games. A perfect example is last week, the game between Miami University and Duke. Last play was absolutely totally insane. Everybody got everything wrong, and yet it set the NCAA world on fire. And that's something that's going to play out throughout the entire season. And basically my question is, do you think the exactness of technology that's integrated in Weevil games does a disservice from a spectator perspective, and that's what's keeping away that kind of like dramatic feeling from being developed, especially when it's played over a long period of time?
I don't think so, because I think especially if you have enough physical elements in the game, you're still going to get those moments. I think, that video I showed of Joust does a really good job of like, how many people in this room have seen Joust before? And how many people in this room were still impressed with that kick that girl did to get the controller out of her? Like, I feel like you can still have new strategies, new play, and when your game is interesting enough and deep enough and has enough that's going for it, basketball seems like a simple sport. It's actually a somewhat complex sport, but it's not that complicated, but you already have people. What makes basketball so interesting is these strategies, these systems that are built on top of it, that are built on top of those, and you have these counter strategies to those strategies. But when you're watching a game, you get broken plays all the time. People are diving on the floor and hustling and throwing their bodies around. I think you can still get that with Weevil games. They'll just be different things they're diving for.
It's less about watching somebody do something amazing and more about 5 years ago when Derek Fisher shot that three against the Spurs and they won, and they're like, that three was never actually supposed to happen. He had like 0.05 seconds and somehow that counted. And that causes like this dramatic, like a Spurs fan will always remember that, because like technically that's supposed to be wrong. But the drama is what causes so much excitement from a spectator perspective.
As a common spectator of sports, I'd say even when my team wins because of a blown call, like I'll take it, don't get me wrong. But I'm not like happy that that happened. I would much prefer the correct call that my team won some other way. I personally, and maybe it's because I'm a digital game person, because I'm a programmer, because of my background, I really hate it when they get the call wrong. I really hate it when something isn't done right. I'm a big baseball fan. I think time has come to get rid of umps and just start using a robot strike zone, because they're all over the place sometimes, and I think that makes it a less good sport, that balls and strikes are often given to one pitcher and not to another pitcher. I think that makes the sport worse, not better. And so I actually want more of that exactness.
Is that likely to happen?
That happens every game.
No, but I mean, is a robot strike like a home plate ump?
There are a small vocal minority of people pushing for it. I think it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen soon. I'll put it like that. But there are lots of broadcasts where they'll just put this little box on the screen as the game's going on. They'll like, the ball went outside of that box and the ump calls a strike and everyone at home's like, ump got it wrong. I think that really does, you know, start to shift people's mindsets on it. And maybe, you know, maybe eventually it'll happen. I think, you know, these big, huge institutions that have been around a long time are really slow to move, and I think that one, but you know, it has happened in other sports, like the thing I was saying before with tennis.
Tennis, yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a possibility. I think it's at least years away. Probably won't happen, but I hope it does.
I think I have time for maybe one more question in the back. Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, he's talking about magic, but it's advanced technology that you can't really understand what the technology is. And a lot of the games that you presented, I don't think are necessarily advanced technology. They're really great games, they're really cool applications of technology. Some of them have more technology, some have less. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to have that, like, wow, how could they possibly have done this?
I think that's part of it for some games and less part of it for some other games. I think, you know, he's saying significantly advanced technology. I would argue that he's not necessarily just talking about future technology. He is predicting the future with that, but the first moment I see a new piece of technology, it's no longer future, right? And so the first time I encounter the Kinect, that's now present technology, but it still has a, you know, an impact on me that I wouldn't have had before I had seen it. I'd say,
so there's magic, like amazing things like Kinect, first time you see it, but there's also like the refrigerator that has a computer in it. Like, who cares, right?
Yeah, and yeah, there are different kinds of things that can be magical and things that are not magical. I personally think part of your job as a designer of Playful games is trying to work that magic in there a little bit to, as I said before, hide the projector, to not exactly spell out how this is working, to make it feel a little bit more mysterious, to make it feel like that's the designer's responsibility. That's what the designer can do to make this feel like a more engaging experience. And it's possible that you're making these games and you just want to make it as fun as possible, you want to make it as engaging as possible, and you really don't care about that sense of awe and wonder. But I really push for that because I think those are the experiences that really stay with you as like a one-shot thing, is that first moment of like, I don't understand what I'm seeing, I don't understand how what I'm seeing is possible. And I would encourage people to try and design for that possibility. And that's part of the reason I keep coming back to LaMarka is, even though like when I see it now, I still think, wow, that's pretty rad, that's really cool. Part of what gets me is seeing other people see it for the first time and not being able to grok it, not knowing what, like not understanding what they're seeing. And to me, that's just witnessing somebody else doing that is a powerful experience for me. And so I'd encourage designers to try and make other people feel that experience and then sort of get that adrenaline rush from watching someone else discover that kind of magic.
Fantastic. Why don't we end it there? Thank you so much.